Flashy girl from Flushing, the nanny named Fran.
Oh, Mr. Sheffield.
Miss Fine.
Hey everyone, we're back. That's right. It's Oh, Mr. Sheffield, a podcast about The Nanny. What's The Nanny? It's a TV show from the 90s starring Fran Drescher, and it's back in HBO Max form, and we're here watching it. Who's us? That's me, Sean DiPasquale, and my co-host,
Toria Sheffield.
That's right. And this week we are here to talk about season 3, episode 12 of The Nanny, The Kibbutz.
The Kibbutz.
Right out of the gate, we're starting with some delightful Yiddish.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess, is it Yiddish? I don't even know if Kibbutz is Yiddish. It might just be Hebrew. It might just be Hebrew. Yeah.
So, and for anybody who doesn't know, a kibbutz is a communal settlement in Israel in which all wealth is like communal, and all profits are reinvested in the settlement. They're usually very based in agriculture, sustainability. They're very big in Israel, and they're basically communes, honestly.
They're communes. A kibbutz is a commune. It is a popular trip for young Jewish people to take to go to Israel. I always conflate a kibbutz and what's the thing? The birthright trip.
Oh, birthright. And there's actually 270 of them in Israel right now, and a total population of 120,000 currently on kibbutzes.
Wow. That's crazy. And that's probably more information than you actually needed on kibbutzes to enjoy this episode. But fun little facts, and good to have some, knowledge going in.
Mm-hmm.
But so this is the one wherein, I mean, how do you sum it up without giving the whole plot? So it's the one where Maxwell wants to send Maggie away for Christmas vacation and insanity ensues.
Yes. And I would say it's the one where Maggie plans to go to a kibbutz instead of the nunnery in Sweden that Maxwell wanted her to go to.
There you go. Switzerland.
Sorry.
So we open basically with Fran kind of catching Maggie kissing a boy in the house. And she's sort of
heavy makeout session. And then Fran's sort of like, Maggie. And then she's like, tilt your head a little bit. Yes.
So like, she's not really mad about this. And like, we even have, Niles kind of pop in behind Fran and also like peeping at what's going on. And just, classic Fran is not that bothered by, Maggie, who we find out this episode is turning 17.
Yeah, I had that same note where I'm like, guys, just keep track of her age. Well, because basically what happens is she's kind of spying on Maggie making out, and then Mr. Sheffield catches her spying on Maggie making out, which leads to him sort of like dragging Fran into his office and saying like, what are we going to do? Like, winter break is coming up. I can't have her sitting on that couch for 3 weeks just making out with somebody. And Fran's like, Mr. Sheffield, she's going to be 17. This is normal. And I also was like, didn't she just turn 16? Like, what? Literally 3 weeks ago, she turned 16. Why not just say she's 16?
They ping pong her age around. I almost wish we had been keeping like a little spreadsheet of like.
Well, that's what I said a few weeks ago. I said, can some listener just keep track of every mention of Maggie's age?
Yeah.
So he's like, what are we going to do with her? So it's like, basically we've established that in this episode, Mr. Sheffield's like agonizing about what to do with Maggie over winter break.
Yeah.
Then in the next scene, Fran's in the kitchen with Niles and Sylvia. It's a little later in the day, and there's
I also love that his solution is like, I'm going to send her to a covenant.
No, not a covenant. That is for witches.
Yes. No. What? Oh, a convent. Right. I'm leaving it in.
Yeah. But anyway, and we'll get there. We're not even there yet, because first we have this scene. Just imagine. We just get some weird magical, like, remember that Christmas episode where Santa was real? We just have a random episode where witches are real, and he's going to go send her off to sort of like learn about her ancestry because the Sheffields are wizards. But anyway, so we have Fran in the kitchen with Niles and Sylvia. Sylvia's literally going, are you sure you don't want to come with your father and me on our holiday trip? And Fran's like, Ma, as tempting as a dinner theater tour of Florida is, I don't know if maybe I can swing it this year. And so Sylvia leaves while noshing on some bread, of course. And then Fran laments to Niles how hard it is to take a vacation when you're single. And Niles basically says, like, well, at least it's not as bad as, working as a servant 24/7 and lugging a family's skis around Vale. So that's clearly like what his plans are going to be this Christmas, which is so sad. Right. And then Mr. Sheffield comes in and he announces that he has a solution to the Maggie problem. He's sending her to a convent, not a covenant, in Switzerland, and she's going to learn about French art and European history for 3 whole weeks. But he's like, Miss Fine, I need you to tell her. And he's like, but do it gently. I don't want her to think I'm an ogre. And Fran literally goes, don't worry, I'll protect you. And then we instantly cut to Fran with Maggie in the living room going, well, the ogre wants to send you to a nunnery.
It was a really good bit.
Yep. And she's like,
it was like such a smooth transition.
Yeah. She's like, he saw you kissing and, there you go. And at first Maggie's like, no way. Like, I don't want to do that. And Fran's like, going away and traveling on your own could really be a good thing for you. She's like, I went to a kibbutz when I was your age for a full summer, and it was the best time of my life. Yeah. And we then cut to Mr. Sheffield.
So do you think it's a little extreme, the nunnery thing? Doesn't that seem like very extreme?
Well, I think the nunnery thing, yes. But I think if you have the luxury or privilege to send your kid away to another country for the summer to learn about art and history and culture, like that.
I have no problem with that. Like, if he was like, look, I just don't want her to like be home all winter and like make out with boys, so like I'm gonna send her on a trip somewhere, or like, that's different. But like, this wasn't really that. It was really like, I don't want her near any boys, so I'm sending her to where nuns are.
Yeah, I mean,
and it's like, doesn't that seem like very extreme?
It definitely was very extreme, but also like seemed very like, it didn't strike me as out of character for Mr. Sheffield. Seems
no,
again,
fair.
Childlike in his problem solving sometimes. So that's Mr. Sheffield's big plan, and Fran breaks it to Maggie, and then we cut to Mr. Sheffield, Niles, and Cece in Mr. Sheffield's office, and this is when we kind of find out about everybody else's holiday plans, because Mr. Sheffield goes, yes, so we'll officially be closed on the 15th. Nobody important's ever in town then anyway. And he's like, Miss Babcock, are you staying in town again? And that's when, this made me so sad. Niles says something like, yes. And like, I'll make sure we're all ready for Vale. And then Mr. Sheffield goes, oh, it'll just be us this year. Niles, like, do your own thing. And and then Niles, even though he had just been complaining about how he hates, being their family servant on vacations, is clearly like disappointed and slightly panicked that he now has to be on his own.
Spend the holiday alone. I
just wrote, this is so sad. This man doesn't have a life or a family because he gave it all up for the Sheffields, and now he doesn't even get to be with anybody on Christmas. Made me sad.
Yeah, because like the nice thing to do would have been like, hey, good news, Niles. You don't have to take care of us, but come with us on this trip. And like but use it as an actual vacation. I got you an adjacent hotel room and, but instead he's just like, I'm taking the family to a really nice destination. Good luck, servant.
And then they all make fun of him for being cheap. Because basically he's sort of like, well, I guess I could book a holiday, and they're all like, ha ha ha, like as if you ever would, like you're so cheap. And then he literally goes, are you insinuating that I'm frugal? And Mr. Sheffield goes, well, I know what I pay you, old man, and you're certainly not spending it on your wardrobe. And I'm like, can you just give him a break, sir?
Also, he said that and like kind of indicates what Niles is currently wearing, but it's like, isn't he just wearing like his butler uniform? Like, is he supposed to be like, isn't that just like a suit?
I guess
that like the butler wears, or is the implication like, oh, this whole time he could have been in like Armani like jackets?
The whole thing seemed unnecessarily cruel, but anyway,
yes, it did, and also it's like, I don't know that like just because he doesn't buy clothes means like they've never established that he's frugal before. It's so weird.
Yes, this was like one of those things where just for this episode they're making that joke, but it was fine. It wasn't the biggest deal, but I was like, let's stop pouring it on or laying it on Niles, guys.
Yeah.
But Then Maggie comes.
You're very defensive of Niles. It's true.
I am.
Yeah.
Well, Maggie comes rushing in saying how totally excited she is for, to travel for her holiday. And at first, Mr. Chef, and she's like, and I owe it all to Fran. At first I was against it, but then she really convinced me. And Fran's like, oh, stop. And then Maggie goes, I can't wait to travel to Israel and live on a kibbutz for 3 weeks. And then Fran's like, no, seriously, stop. And Mr. Sheffield's like, what are you talking about? And, Fran's like, no. Like, you clearly misunderstood our little conversation, Maggie. Like, that's not what I meant. And Maggie's like, no, I remember it exactly. You called Dad an ogre. And then I'm like, oh, Maggie, stop. But so basically it's established that Maggie now is super excited to go to a kibbutz. And in my head, I was like, why is this really a problem though? Couldn't he just be like, no, that's not where you're going? He still is the father. But somehow, because Maggie now is excited to go on a kibbutz, or to a kibbutz, that's where she's going. And Mr. Sheffield is very angry because that was not the summer that he planned for, the winter.
And it's like he's paying. What's he so bad about? It's like, dude, all you had to do there is be like, yeah, I already bought the tickets. You're going to Switzerland. Sorry.
So it was sort of
I don't know why Fran brought up kibbutzes.
It leads to some very funny payoffs, and I'm glad this is what the episode was about. It was a very thin plot to get us here.
It was. Either that or it was the writers definitively sort of being like, Mr. Sheffield has no real control over his kid. Like once she made up her mind, it was a foregone conclusion.
Which I guess kind of actually tracks, especially with how this episode concludes. So that is true. He's a very ineffectual parent in terms of discipline, but
he's feckless.
Yeah, he is. And so basically, everybody kind of leaves the room except Fran, and he's like, Miss Fine, this is not what I wanted, such and such. And Fran's like, she's like, Mr. Sheffield, you have nothing to worry about. My mother let me go to a kibbutz at her age, and it was fine. And this is where we get to this the best part of the episode. This very unexpected thing that happens this episode where he's like, oh, I'd like to see how you shammed your mother into letting you do that one when you were a teenager. And she was like, she's like, you have it all wrong. My mother and I had a very transparent relationship. And then we got to a flashback, like that's sort of like Wayne's World, like
yeah.
The year has got to be 1980. Fran's in this full I say 70s get up because it was 1980. The 70s were still very much alive.
She's wearing like a tracksuit with like a crop top
and bell bottoms.
Right? And like bell bottom pants that sort of flare out. They're not like super bell bottomy, but they like flare out a little bit. It did look it had like an 80s design, but still was like 70s influence.
Yeah, and she's teasing Val's hair. And she's like smacking on some chewing gum. And
Val's dressed in like a frock.
Yes.
Val is like the implication, I think, being that like Fran was like the risque sort of like, fashion forward one. And Val is very much wearing like a very conservative sort of like not very flattering kind of like frocky dress.
But with insanely electric blue eyeshadow.
Yes.
And Fran's literally like, okay, Val, so remember, we're gonna this is the story we're gonna tell my mom. We want to go to a kibbutz this summer. There's no hot Israeli guys there. It's chaperoned 100%, and we're going to absorb the amazing culture. And then they really just like hammer in as many references and jokes to the time as possible.
There's so much good bits in here. You got Val is eating yogurt, and she goes, Fran, why does your mom always put the yogurt in the freezer? And Fran rolls her eyes and she goes, I don't know, because my mom thinks she invented something called frozen yogurt. Parents are stupid.
Yes.
Which is a great bit implying that like Fran's mom accidentally invented froyo and like no one cared. And then like, of course, frozen yogurt became huge like a couple years later.
Yep.
In like early 90s.
And then there's also a reference to they're basically Fran's reading the TV guide and she's like, oh, that handsome guy from Blue Lagoon's going to be on like the talk show. But I forget what show it was. It was a famous show at the time, but I didn't know it. But she was like, it's going to be on TV. And then Franz goes, he's going to be so famous, which is a huge diss to the actor Christopher Atkins, who was the guy in Blue Lagoon. I had to look it up because the only person we know from Blue Lagoon now is Brooke Shields. But there was a period where I think maybe there was, the thought or the idea that this guy was going to be big, and he kind of never really worked on anything significant again.
Yeah.
And then,
because it was just the two of them.
Yes, in Blue Lagoon.
It's like the movie was just like about those two characters. And so it was like he was really handsome. She was like really, really beautiful. And it's like Blue Lagoon should have launched their careers. So like it makes total sense that she's like, oh my God, he's hot and he's going to be super famous. And then, of course, by like 1995 when this episode aired, like no one had ever heard from him.
Yep. And then we get I said, this is funny because some of these flashbacks, they almost this scene causes more questions than answers. But it does. Basically, they turn
It also, this whole flashback felt like an episode of Lost. It's like, oh, they're all connected the whole time.
Yes, because then, they turn on the TV, the talk show, and the host is like, oh, and like, now we're going to have an interview with a new young producer. Like he's a Broadway producer from England, Maxwell Sheffield. So Mr. Sheffield comes out in his, super 70s suit, bell bottoms, mustache, different hair. And he sits down and they're like, he is so handsome. So clearly, Fran and Val had actually seen Mr. Sheffield several decades before they actually met him without realizing it. And he's literally going, and to think I was gonna do this ridiculous musical with all these cats running around the stage. So we have that callback to how we find out he didn't just pass on cats. He came very close to actually producing it.
It's also the origin this sort of like gives like origin to his dislike for Weber.
Yes.
Like you find out that like he was almost going to produce it. Cece talked him out of it. He reveals here. He's like, thank God my wonderful assistant like talked me out of it. Say hi, Cece. And we get like a quick shot of like a brunette Cece.
She has long brown hair.
And like dumpy glasses, and Niles with like a funny little mustache is standing right behind her, giving her bunny ears. So still always still hated each other.
Yeah, so it's like even though I've noticed Cece often says like in the 10 years I've worked with you, Maxwell, but theoretically she actually worked for him long before that. So these people have been intertwined for very long time.
Well, I mean, if she's supposed to be like 16, 17 here, and this is like 1980, then yes, they've been working together for because it's this episode aired in 1995, so they've known each other for at least 15 years, and presumably a little bit before this, because it seems like they've been. I don't know. It's all weird, and it also it makes Maxwell. It made me feel like, oh, is he considerably older than Fran?
No, because I think that, we've always said this. They're in the show, they're only like a decade apart. But I guess here's the thing. First of all, Cece's older than Fran by a few years. We've established she's actually around 40. Right. So she would be like in her mid-20s. And maybe he was this, young, new, hot producer who was like, close to 30, which could happen if you maybe have some connections, which he probably had,
which he did. Yeah. All right, fair. So we find out it passed on cats, and then we also find out what else happens. Then her mom walks in the room. Fran's mom comes in. Yeah, and Sylvia, looks fabulous. She has but still very Sylvia.
Yeah, she has a huge head of hair. It's black with just a streak of, that like little like skunk's tail, whatever that thing is called, of gray at the time. So
I like to call it the Bride of Frankenstein.
Oh, Bride of Frankenstein. Yeah. And she's, dressed fabulously. She actually like really does look like she could be, you see how she's Fran's mom almost really for the first time. You're like, oh yeah, like these women are related, even though it's just for the show. Mm-hmm. And it's really funny. She comes in and she's like, Fran, Mrs. Spielberg from down the hall says her son is dying to take you out. And Fran goes, Steven, that geek from AV Squad, gross. And then she goes, And so, okay, so we've established that I guess Fran
Which
ended up married to Steven Spielberg.
I call bullshit.
Well, here's the thing. I when I first saw this scene, I was like, oh my God, this there's so many like timeline inconsistencies, like logic inconsistencies. But then I was like, you know what? It's just a fun, silly, jokey thing. Like Fran, like, because we also then her mom's like, well, Mrs. Milken says her son would take you out, which is a reference. I had to look this up. Michael Milken.
Steven Spielberg was 34 in 1980.
Yeah, well,
he is 75 years old.
And Michael Milken would have been like 40. Like it
makes no sense that they live at home with their mother.
Well, no, okay. I was thinking maybe they don't live at home with their mothers. Maybe they were just home for the weekend, for a holiday, and happened to see Fran. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're living at home. But we do establish that, yes, Fran passed up a date with the geek Steven Spielberg.
Also, for what it's worth, he was born in Cincinnati, Ohio.
and then also with Michael.
And then they lived in Phoenix.
I know. It truly didn't check. It doesn't check out to any fact check. But that's, you know what? It was fine. This was also pre-Google. So like nobody knew. Probably nobody knew. And then I had to look up who Michael Milken was.
Who is Michael Milken?
So
I didn't even
this
bother.
would have been a really, really hot news story in the early 90s. He was is that Milken started trading in high yield bonds which earned him the nickname Junk Bond King of the 80s. Milken was indicted in 1989 and spent nearly 2 years in prison after pleading guilty to charges of securities fraud. And then he went on to like be crazy wealthy anyway. It's basically like a wolf. It's not, I don't think it's the guy that Wolf of Wall Street is based on, but it was like very, very similar thing. So he was a very wealthy guy who was made famous for getting indicted for junk bonds. But like I had never heard of him, and it kind of just shows you again how these episodes are really time capsules in a lot of ways. And it's interesting, like kind of what sticks culturally and what doesn't. In terms of like you could still talk about O.J. Simpson, and we'd all know O.J., but we don't know.
Yeah, and I mean most of the references they made here were evergreen, except for the Blue Lagoon guy and Milken.
So then Fran is like very, very clearly, like consciously goes, so Val, what do you want to do for summer vacation? I would like to do something that would expand my cultural awareness. And Sylvia cuts her off and goes, you're not going to that kibbutz. And Fran's like, Ma, how do you know? And she's like, oh, darling, I'm your mother. I read your diary. And so Yetta's like, nope, you're not doing that. And then the doorbell rings and it's Grandma Yetta, who now she has the exact same hairstyle and cut. It's just kind of yellow blonde instead of all gray. But she still has those huge glasses and she's smoking a cigarette. And Sylvia's like, oh, your Meshuggah granddaughter wants to go to a kibbutz. Can you believe it? And Yetta's literally like, well, what's the big deal? Like you did when you were her age. And Fran's like, Ma, like I'm never speaking to you again. It's like this whole thing. And then we cut back to present day where Fran is still in Mr. Sheffield's office. And she clearly just had this like kind of memory flashback. And she's like, then she lies to Mr. Sheffield. And she's like, yeah, my mother let me go. No problem. Like we didn't fight about it at all. And she's like, I just wish that, Mr. Sheffield, you would trust me as much as my mother did back then. And then we literally have this, we've never had this in the show before. Then Fran has this thought bubble appear next to her with a young Sylvia going like, I don't trust you as far as I can throw you. And then Fran literally pops the thought bubble with like a letter opener.
It was very cartoonish. It was so weird. And I didn't hate it. I gotta say, I didn't hate it. And I even went like, I'd be okay if the show did this more, got a little sillier. It kind of reminded me, I think I said this last time we had like a sort of silly beat like this. It's got like a 30 Rock vibe to it when it does this kind of stuff.
I really like it. I think in a lot of ways it's very ahead of its time too. When stuff does, because later we had Scrubs, later we had 30 Rock, but it's very creative and it's very funny. And sure, it's not exactly the exact tone of where we started a couple years ago, but it's also not like, oh my God, this is a different show that I'm watching right now.
No. I think it's a natural progression. I enjoyed it. I'd be curious. Like, I know they're developing the musical right now, and like they're talking. You know, they've said even recently. She said like, you know, really not thinking too much about a reboot or anything until we get the musical done. But I wonder if now with like the creative control that they'll have going into like a musical or a reboot, if from go it will be more of this. You know, like if this isn't just kind of the style that they like, I don't know. I haven't watched a ton of their other shows, so I don't know if that's something that like follows them into like, you know, the other shows that they end up producing together.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
And then the next scene, we cut to Fran letting herself into her mom and dad's apartment. And she's like, Ma, I'm here. And then we have this kind of like throwaway but funny joke where she walks into her parents' bedroom and then runs out because she clearly had just walked in on them having sex. And then Sylvia runs out sort of in this like negligee thing. And she's like, would it kill you to knock? And Fran's like, Ma, I hear sounds of ecstasy coming from a room and I think you're eating cheesecake. And but basically, you know, there's that joke, which really ties into nothing except the fact that
nothing. It was just a silly joke.
Yeah, but then Fran's like, you know, Ma, I came here to pick up that stuff from my trip to, you know, back. What was it? No, she said, Ma, remember I asked you to find my box of memories from Israel. Like I thought I would show it to Maggie to get her excited for her trip. And Sylvia's like, well, you know, I don't know why you kept all that stuff. You hated that trip. And Fran's like, what do you mean I hated it? No, I didn't. I loved it. And then she goes, oh, look, my journal. And then she opens it and she goes, I hate this kibbutz.
Yeah, the first line is like, I hate it here.
Yeah, I hate it here. And then she's like, she goes, Friday can almost braid armpit hair. Because I keep making these jokes that on the kibbutz, your body hair is going to go really long.
Yeah.
But so
she sent Val out to smuggle Bic razors in.
Yes. And then she's like, I don't understand it. Like, why did I remember this trip so fondly? And then we do this other flashback and we see there's Val wandering through these long plants.
It's like a flashback? Yeah, it's like a flashback to like a field.
Yes.
And like Val's wandering around alone, with like calling out
the desert hills behind her.
Yeah, like calling out for Fran. So they're clearly in Israel on this kibbutz. And she's like, Fran, like she's like been abandoned. Mm-hmm. And then a young Fran pops up like from behind some bushes with this Israeli guy. And they're like making out, and we find out, oh, she lost her virginity on the trip. Uh-huh. That's why she liked it there. Yep. So we cut back to present, and she's like, oh, right, I lost my virginity. And then she's like, oh no.
Yeah. Well, she's basically like, I remember why I like that trip so much. And then her mom's like, well, there you go. Maybe Maggie will have as much fun as you did. And then Fran goes, over my dead body, and runs out. Yeah. I also looked it up because I was like, is that guy, that shirtless guy she's making out with, he looked kind of ethnically ambiguous, but he's clearly is Israeli. His name was Ophir Anchnel.
Oh my goodness.
He's a very Sephardic looking.
Gesundheit.
Yeah, a very Sephardic looking man.
Yeah, he is.
And so
he's Israeli as hell.
Yeah, hella Israeli that they got.
Hella Israeli, dude.
So then we cut to Cece and Niles back at the mansion, and she's basically just like roasting him for being cheap. And he's like, I'll have you know, I booked a very nice holiday by selling these hideous treble and clef cufflinks that Mr. Sheffield gave me. And then her face falls, and she's like, I gave those to Maxwell for his birthday. And
yeah, it's great. She's really roasting him hard, but that scene didn't bother me as much because he gets one up on her every time.
Yes. I actually really liked it. But here is my question. Did you guess at this point when he mentioned that he had booked a nice holiday for himself that they were going to end up at the same vacation spot?
No, did
So
you?
I did because earlier in the episode when they were all in Mr. Sheffield's office and, Maxwell's like, oh, like, Miss Babcock, will you be in town yet again? She goes, no, I booked a trip as far away from here as possible. And at the time, Niles had actually gone, he went, oh, Santa got my letter. And then we have him in this scene just say how he has booked his own trip. And I was like, I bet you. But anyway, that comes later.
Good call. No, I did not pick that up.
And
it was a fun reveal for me. I was like, ooh.
And then Fran comes running in saying that she needs to talk to Mr. Sheffield ASAP and talk him out of sending Maggie to the kibbutz. And Niles is like, but I thought you just talked him into it this morning. And she goes, and now it's the afternoon. Keep up. And there was this funny beat where he's like, well, they're already out shopping for the trip together. And Fran's like, oh, good. Right about now, she's probably trying on mini skirts. He's watching the sales guy look at her in those mini skirts. They're at each other's throats and the trip is off. But then, lo and behold.
But no sooner does she say that than the door swings open and Maxwell and Maggie walk in wearing like matching t-shirts, but it's like he's wearing one that says daddies and she's wearing one that says little girl.
Yeah. And, then she's like, thank you so much for all this great stuff, Dad. I love you.
Which Elizabeth went, oh, cute. I love it. It is kind of adorable that they brought those together.
And I don't know if I would think a full-on teenage girl doing it would be as cute as an actual child, but still, they're so. What is adorable is how well they're getting along and how happy this makes Mr. Sheffield because, Maggie runs upstairs after giving a big hug and he's like, oh, Miss Fine, I need to thank you so much for this kibbutz idea. Like Maggie and I haven't been this close in ages. And she's like, okay, well, you're going to have to cancel the trip. And he's like, wait, what? And she's like, this made me laugh. She goes, Israel is going to be closed for Hanukkah. Too many people, too many candles. It was a fire hazard. And he's like, Miss Fine, like, what are you up to? What's actually going on?
And she's like, well, and then she starts to tell him, she's like, look, when I went to Israel, I lost and then the kids come downstairs. You get I think the only appearance this episode of Brighton and
Gracie,
the other one.
Yeah, that's right. The other one.
Gracie. And the other one, and she's like, I lost my hat. And he's like, and the kids come down, the kids are standing there and he's like, you lost your hat on your trip? Like, who cares? And she's like, no. This was like a very important like hat. And he's like important. He's like, oh, it must have been a very important hat to you. And she goes, well, it was very important to my mother. And like, that's sort of what clicks it for him. And that he realizes, oh, she's not talking about a hat.
And he's like, okay, everybody out.
And so he's like, oh yeah, no, everyone get out. And he like kicks everyone out of the kitchen except for her, for Fran. He grabs Fran, he pulls her back and he's like, whoa.
Yep. And he's like, you know what? He's like, I don't know why I keep asking you for help. You always screw things up. And he's like, the trip is off. And she's like, okay. Like, I'll go tell Maggie. And he's like, no way. He's like, I'm going to go do it. And he's like, and you're going to see how parenting is done right. And so we instantly cut to now the whole family is actually at the kibbutz because clearly he was not able to convince Margaret or just basically order her as a father not to go. And clearly they came up with this as the next best solution. So Fran is sunning herself. The other Sheffield children are all there. They're picking grapefruits. Mr. Sheffield is there like with a sun hat on. And he's like, Miss Fine, like this was a wonderful solution. You came up to our problem. Yeah. And she's literally like, all right. She's like, now go pick some more grapefruits. If we don't come back with our quota, they're going to kick us off. And so he wanders off, and then that same shirtless guy from before shows up, and she's like, Yanni, like, you still work here? And he's like, I do. And he's like, but now I work here with my son. And he like motions to this other sort of like gorgeous Israeli guy, and that younger guy
who's standing next to Maggie.
Yeah, he literally, it really was so Israeli. He's literally wearing like it's like a Coca-Cola shirt, but it's all in Hebrew, and he has like a bandana, and he's like, hey, are you liking the kibbutz? kibbutz? And she's like, yes. And then Fran literally runs over and hits him with her hat and is like, get away from her. No, you don't. And then the button of the episode is we cut to Niles on some sort of like tropical beach vacation at some sort of like mixer party. And he has like, like one of those, an alcoholic drink with, coconut. And he's dancing around this little dance floor. And he's like, way to go, Sheila. Like, looking good, Joan. And he's like, shake it, Miss Babcock. And then he freezes, and he had been talking to a woman in a hat. So like we as the audience didn't see. And then Cece slowly turns around, and we realize that like he didn't know she was there. It was more like a automatic response of like, and they look at each other, and he is just like, I want to go home. Yeah. And that's the button. And that was the episode. It was just really fun.
It was a fun episode. And there was a lot of good one-liners, so I'm excited to get into segments. And now, segments.
So, segments.
Yeah, no, I think we should move on to segments.
We can move on to our segments.
And now, segments.
Segments. With Sean and Toria.
Segments.
I feel you.
I feel you, my segment.
I don't know why that's always my go-to.
I love you. Even when we talk about quotes, we will figure out who's the CC. I could write a whole parody of that song. All right. I'm assuming the segments theme has also now played. And now here we are in segments. So lines. I have so many. You mentioned towards the end, when Maxwell kind of kicks everyone out of the kitchen and he pulls Fran back, and he's like, realizing that like now this trip means like she's going to lose, Maggie's going to potentially lose her virginity to some Israeli guy. He's like, it's amazing. Every time I ask you to do something, you always manage to screw it up. And she goes, yeah. And yet you continue to ask me, you need help, mister. Which is such a good spin. I love that.
Yep.
I also liked, Miss Fine, I've made a decision. And she goes, yeah. And he's like, I don't want Margaret to spend the whole winter vacation with that boy, so I'm sending her abroad. And Fran goes, abroad? You want her swinging that way?
Yep.
What else?
I really liked when Fran first mentions a kibbutz to Maggie. She goes, a kibbutz isn't like that one of those communes from the 60s? And Fran goes, kind of, except the only thing we smoked was fish.
Right. And then also, it's also, what was where she goes, it's Niles and Cece going back and forth. Oh, it's the it's the line about where do you even keep your cash, Niles? And he goes, somewhere you'll never get near. And she goes, oh, your mattress? And there's like this long beat, and you're like, ooh, that good one, Cece. And he points to Mr. Sheffield, and Niles goes, no, his.
I really liked when Fran, after seeing her parents have sex, goes, hold on, I got to take a swig of Manischewitz. And she swigs and she goes, good vintage, May.
Also, at one point, Cece calls him the lost Marx brother Cheapo.
Yes.
Which I really like.
Yes. Well, and also in that episode, Niles is alone in the kitchen cleaning, and he goes, ugh, yuck, this old dish rag has seen better days. And then Cece walks in and he goes, were your ears burning? It was very, very funny. I actually already said some of my favorite lines throughout because I couldn't wait.
Oh, also in that same scene, it's Niles going, it's when Fran and Niles are talking about the vacation, and she's like, it's hard to plan a vacation when you're single. And he's like, well, you've never had to do it where you're hauling around ski equipment. And it's Niles, can you get me a brandy? Niles, do this. Niles, do that. And then Mr. Sheffield enters the kitchen, and he goes, Niles. And Niles goes, what is that on your shoe? And he like drops to the floor and like rubs something off Mr. Sheffield's shoe and then runs out of food.
Yes. It was So good. Like even the way he looks at Mr. Sheffield as he runs out of the room was a hilarious comedic beat.
Yes, because he looks at him like, yeah, and then it was really, really. He's maybe my favorite actor on this show.
God,
I just think he nails it. Every line, every delivery.
And I think, it's one of those things where people forget how hard comedy is because when people do it well, it looks so easy. But there's so many choices within that really like short 30-second joke, like beat for beat, so many choices you could make, and he made them the funniest version possible.
Yeah, he really did. He's great.
I think that's it.
You have any more lines?
Oh no, I think that's it for me. I can move on to Yiddish.
Let's do it.
Well, we have Meshugana, which we've had before, as in your Meshugana granddaughter wants to go to a kibbutz, and that means a mad or idiotic person. And then I don't know if this is Yiddish, but it's definitely Jewish, where at one point she goes, give me another knish, when she's meaning give me another kiss. But it's kind of, that was just wordplay because a knish is a traditional like Jewish baked good. And it's, you maybe have seen them. It's like kind of like doughy bread and inside, or flaky bread, and it's usually like a fruit filling. I usually find them honestly.
Potato, there's potato knishes, which are delicious.
I find the baked ones usually a little disappointing. They're usually a little too much bready dough and dry.
Yeah, I'm a savory knish. I like potato knish. That's the only kind I like. I like savory.
Yeah, I'd rather just go for a Danish too if I'm over.
All right, and then Fran.
Oh no, trivia. We got trivia.
Oh, what's the trivia? Did you have something?
I do have something.
What do you got?
So, you know how I looked up the name of the guy that Fran lost her virginity to and found out 100% a USDA approved Jew.
Yas queen.
I was like, well, who is the son? That guy's name, he was credited as Michael Dow. And this guy looked a lot like the other guy. So I was like, maybe they are related. But no, his name is Michael Dow. And this guy went on to work and just again to set who this is up, at the end of the episode, it was the son of the guy that Fran lost her virginity to, who's chatting up Maggie. Michael Dow. And this guy went to work as an associate director and also producer on a number of Fran and Peter's future projects, including What I Like About You and Happily Divorced. So I wonder if maybe he was like an assistant or something on this show. And they were like, yeah, do you want to be like that small, bit part? Or if maybe he got that job as the actor and then he did networking through there. But this is his only credited acting appearance. And
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, maybe he was already working on set and they threw him a bone. Yeah, I don't know. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Other small thing. It's like this was entered into IMDb goofs, but I don't know. I think there is an argument to be made that this goof is a goof because the commenter points out that
you're a goof, you goof.
You quit goofing around. In the flashback, in the first flashback, Val and Fran are discussing how they'll con Sylvia into letting Fran go to the kibbutz by claiming they want to connect with, quote, the ancient heritage of our people. And the person writes, however, numerous episodes of this series firmly establish that Val is Italian and Roman Catholic, not Jewish, and thus has no ancient Jewish heritage to connect with. Well, that is true. Many Catholics take pilgrimages to Israel. Like if you go to Jerusalem, there are tours that's literally why everybody fights over it as the Holy Land. Like you can definitely literally walk the exact route that Jesus walked. And a lot of people do that, or swim in this exact river. So yes, I think our people.
No, I think you're 100% right. And the person who wrote this sort of because the line is, we want to connect with the ancient heritage of our people. They never say Jewish heritage. She just says the ancient heritage. Mm-hmm. And this person who wrote this entry on IMDb adds the word Jewish in there, as if that's implied. But I think if they had meant to write Jewish heritage, they would have, and they didn't. They said heritage because of that reason, because Val isn't Jewish. And so they're still both connecting. I mean, Israel still has it's still a holy land because there's still Catholic related things there. I mean, Jesus was there.
Oh, hold on. Let me pause this.
It's not just
100%.
It's not just Rome is not the only place where Roman Catholics would find, something related to like their heritage.
No. In fact, yeah, when I was in Israel and we did a walking tour of Jerusalem, my aunt specifically wanted one that my uncle, who is Catholic, would really enjoy. So we did almost like a Catholic tour of Jerusalem.
Right.
It was fascinating. Cool. And then for the Fran or the Cece, this is where we can really get into what we were talking about earlier. I said, well, I've been to a kibbutz, but I was not doing anything like that at 17. And I wrote, I couldn't have paid someone to take it at that age. But it sounds like you were doing a lot of sexy stuff as a teen.
Yeah, I had done sex stuff by like, honestly, like 13, 14.
Ugh.
I had done everything except like sex. I hadn't had like intercourse at that age. That I think I was closer to 16, 17 when I did that. But so I to me, I was like, I don't know. If she's 17 and still a virgin, like you done a good job, Mr. Sheffield. Like that'll do, pig. Like, it's fine. She's 17. She's gonna go to college in like a year, and then like, what are you gonna do?
I mean, that's probably the healthier perspective. There should not be shame around all of this stuff. No. But I would have been Cece, Mr. Sheffield's pathetic assistant at this age, not
because
Fran.
I also think it comes down to the kid, I mean, I really do think, like, I think if, Maggie wanted to lose her virginity, she would have lost it by now. But like Maggie obviously is not just looking to like, screw any guy she meets. Like, she could have. Like, she's been alone with boys before multiple times. We've established that she's had boyfriends and been alone with them in places. So like her not losing her virginity sounds more like her choice than like my daddy will be mad at me.
I just had this thought. We are probably the first people in the entire history of the earth who have had this in-depth discussion about Maggie's virginity.
I don't know. There's 2 other nanny podcasts out there. So if they're doing their job, they would have had this conversation too, or we are the definitive nanny rewatch podcast. And that is why.
Yeah. Cause we'll
get into it. Hey, we'll mix it up. On that note, I just want to quickly, before we leave, I do want to amend something I said earlier. I did some digging and it turns out HBO Max has added Oi to the World to their lineup.
Fantastic.
Which is great. Yeah. So very excited to get to that one. That's 2 episodes. Or no, they have it as episode 14, but that is incorrect, I believe. Because we're on 12, 13. Oh no, it is episode 14. Cool. That's amazing. So it's in the right order.
Well, I'll quickly, if we're doing a little corrections corner, I will say that one of our listeners messaged us on Instagram, Ron Minst, who also told us that great factoid about the Orange County economic crash.
Oh, yeah. Cool.
So I guess we had made a joke a few episodes ago about how why aren't there any Jewish people on Downton Abbey? And apparently there was actually a whole little plot arc where there is a Jewish family in Downton Abbey. And
so we revealed to the world that we've never watched Downton Abbey.
That's really what that was about. We were making an assumption, and there is a Jewish character, and his family comes into play. And
you still never get me to watch that show. So I still won't watch it, Ron. Stop it.
I don't know why I won't watch it. Maybe I'm just.
I don't
know.
either.
It's just one of those things.
I don't either. I'm sure it's great. Everyone seems to love it.
Yep. But I think that's an episode.
That's an episode. So thank you everybody for listening. If you like the show, please let us know by going to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and rating it and leaving a review and telling your friends. And if you want to drop us a line, you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at Oh Mr. Chef Pod. And that's it. Next week, we'll be back with an offer she can't refuse, which sounds like it's probably going to have a lot of Italian stereotyping in it. So I can't wait.
Yeah, well, that'll be perfect for you. That'll be a perfect.
That'll be perfect for me.
Venn
for my Italian
diagram.
half. Exactly. Mm-hmm. All right. Bye, Toria.
Goodbye, Sean.
Bye.
Bye.
The Flushing girl from Flushing, the nanny named Fran.
Oh, Mr. Sheffield.
I go, Miss Fine.